Hello everyone and welcome back to this week's Arrow. And in this week's video we're going to do and talk about the Passover study. As we know, like I said in last week's video, that the Passover took place this Friday, and we have now celebrated the Lord's Memorial last Friday, and we have to understand Jesus resurrected from that point, after this point, on Nisan 16th. We can see after the Lord's Memorial takes place, we can see that Jesus is resurrected on Nisan 16th. We can see then when we carry on, when it comes to how we were talking about in last week's video, we see that there's also a clear description of what it talks about during Nisan 16th and onwards. We can see, as it says in Matthew 12 chapter 40th verse, it indicates Jesus indicates he would be in a tomb for 3 days and 3 nights, an expression in our time and culture that implies, we have to understand, 3 24-hour time periods or 72 hours. But we have mentioned about this before, that the rest of the biblical record, however, indicates the times were considerably shorter. Sorry, you can see. So as it goes from Friday afternoon to Sunday morning, we can see. How do we harmonize this apparent disagreement, though? We must understand, because they're clearly saying, as it's recorded in Nisan, for the date of Nisan 16 from Matthew 12 40th chapter, after the Lord's Memorial, after Jesus' death takes place, we can see Jesus is stating 3 days and 3 nights. This implies, of course, in our time period of 72 hours. We can see how the biblical record indicates that this period was considerably shorter. So how do we get a clear answer for what this means? We have to say, well, an understanding of the Hebrew idiom is necessary. We can see this, we can see, is an idiom, and to understand what this idiom is providing us, it will allow us to resolve the difficulty that has been provided through this statement. So, while the language of the New Testament is Greek, the humans being employed by God through the Holy Spirit were mostly Hebrew. Hence, though the thoughts were of divine origin, the words spoken and written, we have to see, came from minds conditioned to Hebrews expressions, Hebrew idioms, we have to see. Because when it comes to writing a book, we can see that it's based on a person's mind. Something can totally change on what the same story can be written about, because it can be expressed in a slightly different manner based on yourself, based on your culture and your religion, ultimately on what you speak, we can see. And it can clearly change how you write the same book, we can see. If two people wrote a different book, it clearly can be altered based on the mind's thought. So, in a living language, there is a continuous growth and decay phrases, constructions and expressions that are contrary to the usual patterns of the language and have meanings different from the literal ones, we must see. These are called idioms, like we've been talking about, we see, and are usually particular phrases which we learn as separate items easily in our own language with difficulty in another. We have to understand that is the clear separation of idioms, we have to say. And we must be very careful in this situation there. We're dealing with an ancient idiomatic expression. We must not apply modern and literal meanings of how idioms are perceived of today towards this statement, for it is only going to be interpreted wrong, as the other implied statements of this statement have already been said. So, in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, we can see the Jewish idiom quote to equate 3 days on the third day and after 3 days, we can see. Instances of this, we can see. So, like I said, it's equating from 3 days on the third day and after 3 days. Instances where it talks about this, we can see, is in 1 Kings 20th chapter 29th verse, 2 Chronicles 10th chapter 5th and 12th verse, and many other places. And as the Hebrews had no word exactly corresponding to the Greek to signify a natural day of 24 hours, we must see. That's the key point, because they did not have an exactly corresponding word to say 24 hours. They used night and day, or day and night, for it. That is the key understanding of how this idiom was used in the first place and why it was used, because of Hebrews and Greek translations, we can see. And then we must understand, apparently, this custom was derived from practice of counting a part of a day as a whole day and night. So now we're getting somewhere from how we can interpret the 3 days and 3 nights, because it was based on custom. They derived from the practice of counting a part of a day as a whole day and night. We see this practice is corroborated by the rabbinic literature. We must understand here 3 days and 3 nights must be interpreted according to Hebrews usage and not our own understanding. We therefore conclude from this understanding that Jesus was not in the grave for 3 full days, but rather for 3 full nights. Was not there for that case. He was not there for the 3 full days or the 3 full nights, but rather parts of 3 days and nights. That's the key understanding. Because it's how because of the rabbinic literature, it's how they wrote days out, because there was no apparent word for 24 hours, we can see, for a day. So we have to conclude that it talks about 3 parts of 3 days and nights, we can see. Then finally, we can see there's internal evidence to support this conclusion. As in Mark 16, chapter 2nd verse, we read, "And very early in the morning, the first day of the week, they came unto the sepulchre at the rising of the sun." The first day of the week is Sunday, according to the Jewish reckoning. And when the woman arrived, Jesus had already been resurrected, we must see. So he had been in the grave part of this day from after 3 p.m. we can see. So when it comes for this day of the 3rd day, it's actually this was in the grave for part of this day from after 3 p.m. and then we can 3 p.m. Nisan 14th Friday until the early morning, we can see. And this was Nisan 16. So I'll reiterate that once again. We can see the first day of the week is Sunday, according to the Jewish reckoning. And when the woman arrived at that point, Jesus had already been resurrected. So he had been in the grave for part of this day from after 3 p.m. in Nisan 14th Friday until the early morning, you must see. And this early morning was the Nisan 16th. So, hopefully now you guys understand the idiom that has been provided through the Hebrew language, the reason why this was put in place, and how we should interpret this idiom. And because of the problems with this idiom, how there were different beliefs or understandings of this statement. So that's all for this week's video. See you next week. Bye.